Baby Muntaha is just weeks old, but her grandmother has resorted to feeding her tea. There is no food, and her mother has been killed.
How am I supposed to feed the child? She's an orphan. How can I give her tea? How can I feed her lentil soup when the child isn't even 3 months old yet?
Hunger is leading to desperation, and families will resort to anything to feed those whose lives have only just begun. In the Zakim area of northern Gaza, they carry flour to make what basic provisions they can. Israel's own data shows only 14% of the volume of aid recommended by the UN has entered Gaza in recent weeks, but reports today of dozens of Palestinians killed as they waited for humanitarian supplies, with hundreds more injured. The IDF said it was not aware of any casualties.
We see death with our own eyes. We want to eat, man. It's all fire and killing.
International pressure to stop the humanitarian disaster has led 3 G7 countries in recent days to say they will recognise the state of Palestine. Canada now follows France and the UK.
Canada will always steadfastly support Israel's existence as an independent state in the Middle East, living in peace and security. Any path to lasting peace for Israel also requires a viable and stable Palestinian state, and one that recognizes Israel's inalienable right to security and peace.
Mark Carney said there were stipulations including elections without Hamas, but Israel said Canada's position amounted to a reward for Hamas and accused Canada of harming the efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza.
They need food and they need people to be able to get them the food.
But declarations of statehood remain slogans without strategies. And without US backing, it's difficult to see how a two-state solution might materialise. Donald Trump does not support the creation of a Palestinian state and criticised Canada's decision on social media. That will make it very hard for us to make a trade deal with them, Trump said. Oh, Canada. But it also leaves the US more isolated in its stance. In Israel, US President Donald Trump's envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, has arrived and is expected to meet officials today as international pressure mounts and the humanitarian situation deteriorates further. In the UK, 40 members of the House of Lords have said that commitment to Palestinian statehood could breach international law. In the last 24 hours, the UAE said it had conducted more aid drops because it is food that remains the immediate problem. And without urgent aid, doctors in Gaza's hospitals say more will starve to death. And whatever the status of statehood, these children are yet to see anything change for them.
Well, Yossi Meckelberg is a consulting fellow at Chatham House. Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us more about this letter to Keir Starmer? Who signed it and what have those in the House of Lords said?
Well, as far as I understand, as a non-international lawyer, recognizing a state should meet the criteria of the Montevideo Convention about having a permanent territory, functioning, governing, and the rest. And I think this is an attempt to stop recognition. I find it quite interesting that when what we see over the last 22 months of daily violation of international law and maybe by recognition of a Palestinian state, I think will stop much more serious violation of international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, and other things that are happening on the ground as we speak. Peers are finding to be that legalistic about the recognition. I will add to that, at the end of the day, if we want the international community to recognize Palestinian state, we know it has to go through the Security Council, and this, unfortunately, will be blocked by the United States.
How legitimate is the claim that the Prime Minister could risk breaching international law with his pledge to recognise Palestine as a state? What basis would they have for that?
Again, I will ask the question, what is the UK and so many other countries, they've done part of their obligation to international humanitarian law to stop the war in Gaza, to see the end of tens of thousands of people killed, of stopping that humanitarian aid doesn't enter. And, compared to that, whether there is a breach of international law or not when it comes to recognizing Palestinian state. We know that more than 140 states around the world have done it. France and Canada declared their intention. So again, I'm not an international lawyer, but I just ask myself if this is the most important part of this saga of recognizing Palestinian state. And here comes the catch-22. Because Israel is blocking any negotiation of peace process, because it builds settlements, because it makes the life of Palestinians impossible, because it was active in preventing election for many years among the Palestinians, even if the Palestinians themselves have to take also responsibility for that. If the condition is to have a permanent territory and having a functioning government, but the country that is against having a two-state solution, the Palestinian sense blocking that, we are in a situation that this is not going to happen unless Israel gets anything in negotiation, which also is blocking a viable peace process reaching a two-state solution.
Some have criticised the lack of substance and suggested this is symbolic. It doesn't actually change anything on the ground. So to what extent does recognising statehood actually mean anything tangible?
First, symbolism is important in international affairs and it's important in diplomacy. So I won't dismiss such symbolic act, especially when it's done not only by one country, but a group of countries, two of them permanent members of the Security Council, three of them members of the G7. It creates some momentum. So I don't think it's right to dismiss it. It's just trying to change the imbalance of power, or some of the imbalance of power between Israel and Palestine.
How much pressure is now on the US and Israel after all of this?
I think it puts some pressure, but we know that in both countries there are governments and leaders that don't necessarily respond in the way that's expected to pressure. But having said that, we saw that, the pressure when it comes to Gaza, Prime Minister Netanyahu, at least in his statement, even if not always in practice, already talked about, yes, there is humanitarian crisis, there is a need to ensure that there is more food in Gaza. Even some of the extreme right wing try to spin it. Yes, we need to bring more food into Gaza because it stops Israel from defeating Hamas. So there is response to pressure, but so far the international community hardly used a small part of the leverage that it has in terms of putting pressure. So as long as they respond, the unpredictable, the known unknown is always how President Trump is going to react to that. We already have possibility that he will suspend talks about trade agreements with Canada as a result. So that's the kind of question, the unpredictability of Washington under Trump. And that we'll have to wait and see.
Yossi Mekelberg, thank you very much.
Thank you.